In this video, we're going to start on Project 2, Stage 2, where we are going to write some HTML and CSS to make the header and to make the recipes section. We're going to start by writing the HTML for the header. That's what we're doing in this video. Down here is the brief. You can download that, open it up. And here is the text that you can use for this project. I have that file open here, and we may or may not use it. It does not need to be in your project. This is just so you can copy and paste stuff. All right, let's move to the brief. You can read through the introduction on your own. This page is notable because it shows you all the colors that you'll need. And this page just describes the overall structure. Each section will have 3 subsections: required elements and class names, sizes and spacing, typography. All elements and class names shown in the brief are required. You can create additional elements if needed, and there will be some cases where we will do just that. If you're giving them classes, which is not required in all cases, you need to use BEM naming principles. And you can use absolute positioning only when noted. The same would hold for positioning something with relative positioning. Here we are at the first page, and on this page, well, the first substantial page, it gives us the elements and class names, well, in particular the class names that we need to use. So let's see how can we read this. Number 1, there's a red number 1, and it's this box that is surrounding all these elements. Well, it's the nav, and we're told use the nav semantic element, and it should be a block called nav. So that means it has the class nav. For number 2, well, that's the logo. Nav logo, and you would write it like this, because that's how you write an element, right? So we're told it's an element called logo of the nav block, so you write it like this. Every other case, you do it the same way: nav _ links, nav _ link. We're not told to use an img tag, but we can just deduce that because it's an image. Find the image in the images folder. We can use relative positioning to shift its position to make it look like it's further to the left compared to these elements. We'll deal with that when we're styling. For these elements, number 3 is the group. It's an element that wraps around these 4 anchor tag elements. And we're going to use a UL for that, a list. These will be anchor tags. But if they're inside a list, remember, you got to put LIs around them because a list always needs to contain LIs. So that's the explanation. How about you go ahead and give it a try? Try to set up the HTML for the nav. And then unpause the video. I'll show you how. Okay. Nav.nav is the first thing we need. That's a nav tag with the class nav. Next, we need the img tag with the nav logo class. Note the double underscores. For the src, we are told find the corresponding image in the images folder. We don't even need to open the images folder. Just start by typing /, and you'll be prompted with everything that's in the current working directory. Go into the images folder and find the appropriate image. It happens to be this one. And give it an appropriate alt text. Triple Peaks Coffee Shop logo. All right. Next, number 3, nav links. As I mentioned, it should be a UL. Also, as I mentioned, we need LIs inside the UL. Otherwise, it's a validation error, and and it becomes not accessible. Without the LIs, it's not accessible to people who use screen readers. Inside the LI is where we put the anchor tag. Now, you may be wondering at this point, where do I put the class? Do I put it here? Do I put it here? Do I put it in both places? No, you wouldn't put it in both places, and rarely, if ever, would you have the same class on the parent and the immediate child because they would require different sets of styles. You would put it here. And the way I know that is, well, I know that we need a class on the anchor tags because if we're following BEM rules, we only style elements with classes. And if we need to change the color of these anchor tags, which we will need to do, I can tell that just by looking at the image, we will need to apply those styles directly to the anchor tag. You may recall this from the previous sprint. We can't apply it to a parent class because that color change will be overwritten by the browser's styles. So we need the class here. And then we need to replicate this 3 more times. So note that each anchor tag is wrapped in its own LI. Then the text. And eventually these are going to lead to the corresponding sections. There will be a video about that at the end of this stage. So that is all we need to do there. Let's take a look at it in the browser, and what we see is there's the logo. There are all the links. So we're done with that, for the HTML at least. Moving on to the next page. Let's split this into pieces. So you see how there's this group of elements here, and then there's this group down here. Let's focus on this group. We have 2 text elements, 8 and 10, and then this other text element, 9. So 3 text elements. But the outer elements are the header title element, that's number 8, which is going to be an H1, and the header description element, this one, number 10. This element is a text element, but it's inside the H1. We're going to use a span tag here, and the reason we're going to have a span tag is so that we'll wrap this blue text in a span tag. Then we can change the color and the font size and all that stuff to make it look the way we want. But also, that's how we can produce this line break. We can force a line break by simply giving the span tag display block. There are other ways that we could handle that. You can read about them here, but this is the way that you should do it. And then this is just an image. We're going to use absolute position for it, which is the same that we did in Project 1. There are definitely other ways that you could do it, but we're just going to use absolute position in this case. So go ahead and write the HTML for that, and then unpause the video, and we'll walk through it together. Okay, so we need to be below the nav, not inside the nav. We need an H1 with the header title tag, header title class. Inside here is where we put that span tag. So it's going to be span.header span accent is the class name that was used. And in here is where we want that blue text, the text that will eventually be blue, specialty coffee. After that span tag is where we want to put this text. So like right here. And in this case, we don't even need a space there because there's going to be a line break that we're going to force with the CSS, so there's not even a need for a space there. So just like this is what it could look like. Then we need the subtitle. What element should we use for the subtitle? Well, you may think an H2, but that would be incorrect. You should use a paragraph tag, and that's because the the H elements, the heading elements, need to form like a navigable guide to the structure of your project. So, for the sake of screen readers and for other sorts of automated tools, and sort of think of a table of contents. You might have an entry for uh, each chapter in the table of contents, and in some table of contents, you might see subsections and things like that. But this is not a subsection. It's just additional text associated with the title. So we just want to use a generic paragraph tag for it. And finally, the image. And we can use the same technique we used before to find the appropriate image. In this case, it's not immediately apparent, but you can just go and look through the images until you find the one that matches. And that's the one you need to use. Illustration of a coffee shop, that's fine. Now if we go to the browser, we see the text. We see that there's no space here, but as I said, this isn't going to matter because we're going to style it and there's going to be a line break there. And there's that text and there's the image. So it's perfect except completely unstyled, but it suits our purposes for now. So now back to the brief. We have a couple more elements to deal with. Now, for these, this is often a source of a bit of confusion for students. They struggle to see how to implement this or find solutions that are a lot more complicated than is necessary. You really do only need these classes, two classes, one for the outer container and one for the paragraph elements. We'll call the outer container header footer, and we'll call the paragraph elements header paragraph. There's no need for separate classes for any of these text elements. They all have the same exact styles. We're going to use divs here for the container, for any containers that are used. And that's a bit of a hint. Try to put the markup together that will allow us to arrange the elements like this using Flexbox. And if you're struggling to figure out how, remember the nav is set up in such a way that we'll be able to split this element on the left and this group of elements on the right. So there's something we're doing that's allowing us to keep this group of elements together as a group. You need to do something similar here. Not necessarily with the same tags. Okay, give it a try. And now let me show you how you can do this. So as I said, we want divs. We want a div, header, footer. And inside this header footer, well, we have 4 text elements, right? Header, paragraph. And I'm just going to mark these with, well, no, I'll just use the text. Can I copy? You know what? I'm going to open up that texts.md file. It's in my downloads directory. I'm going to open it up. Well, apparently I'm going to open it in a different window. And let's see here. We need 4 of these, right? And then copy. That goes there. Oh, what happened there? Copy. Okay, so here's the 4 text elements. Are we done? No. we need to group these leftmost elements together so that we're able to keep them all on the left side when we go to style it. And to group elements, you just put them inside something. Put them inside. In this case, I'm going to use a div. And the reason I'm using divs here is because the structure, you don't really want to use, like with a list, all the elements are supposed to be the same thing. So technically this wouldn't go in the list, and we would need to, we would have to have it as a separate element, and that's just going to increase the complexity. So we're going to stick with this relatively simple structure. And if you're still not sure why this is the way to do it to make the CSS work, it will become more apparent once we start writing the CSS for that section. And finally, we can go back to Chrome and see that, yep, there is the stuff that we just added. And with that, we are done with the HTML portion. And next, we will resume and start to style it in the next video.